the chat, so that's great. All right, and we're live. Hello, everybody. It's Kristen for Bookish Pen Pals, and I'm here tonight with, I think, one of my favorite authors now, Robert Dugoni. So welcome, everyone. I already see some people signed in. I'm going to give them a couple minutes before we start talking about your books, and I definitely want to start with A Killing on the Hill because that's the latest, and then I want to talk about two of my favorites. And then maybe we'll do some rapid fire questions too, because I have lots of questions for you.
Sounds good.
So we have a couple people in the chat. Nicole Rubin is in the chat. She actually joined the Fable group first and read A Killing on the Hill with us. And she gave me some great questions that she wants answers to as well. So
Awesome.
I'll give them a minute. Welcome, everyone.
I was just getting off the golf course, and they have snacks on Wednesdays. And so everybody in the snack room was probably over 80. And, some were 90.
Oh.
And they had all read A Killing on the Hill because it was sort of their era. They remembered a lot about it.
Yeah. So it must have been interesting to hear their thoughts on that.
I think the overall impression would be one that you would maybe guess, which was it was a different time then. It was a slower time then. We didn't have phones. We didn't have computers. We didn't have 40,000 television stations. You listened to the radio and Jack Benny and all those guys, and you went to the Parrot Theater and you saw first time release movies, and you had movie stars back then. You don't have movie stars anymore.
No.
You had your celebrities. You had the Bing Crosbys, the Bob Hopes, the Lucille Balls, and it was really, I don't want to say it was sad. It was really interesting to talk to them about it because, when I wrote the book, I really tried to be true to the time period, and they were really kind of swept away.
Well, that's great. I often get nostalgic around the holidays because Bing Crosby is one of my favorites, and White Christmas is like one of my favorite movies of all time.
Yeah.
And there just isn't that feeling sometimes, I mean, and I think I'm lucky because I'm Gen X and grew up in the 80s. But in all reality, when we look back at time periods in history, like I always think I was born in the wrong era.
Yeah.
Because it was just so beautiful. And I love that simple time. And even I think of the 80s as a simple time. But in all reality, when we're thinking about, the times of the Great Depression and, the 30s and 40s, much simpler life and still, big family. And, life is so busy now.
Yeah.
I think we're missing out on something.
One of my favorite recollections as a young boy, and I'm one of 10 kids, was my mother would get us all in our pajamas, and we'd sit down and watch The Wizard of Oz, which was in black and white, and because we only had a black and white television. And then when it went to commercial, when that house landed and it went to commercial, we would all run across the street down to Mrs. Pilgrim's house because they had a color television. And we would sit, and there'd be bowls of popcorn, and then we'd wait, and Dorothy would open that door, and it was color. And I can remember just, and those ruby slippers were really ruby slippers. It was just it's a remarkable memory. I think there's a novel in there somewhere. I just don't know what it is yet.
It'll come to you. It'll fall into your lap because I've seen you say that many times. So let's get started. When looking at your series and the standalone novels and the character building, I was sucked right into Seattle in this book. So this is the latest, A Killing on the Hill. And it's interesting because I'm a huge Nelson DeMille fan, which I've seen him, talk about your writing, and this, I love the series. I love the characters, and I know that Tracy Crosswhite is very popular for you. But the standalone novels and the character building and the setting is like incredible.
Thank
You
you.
feel like you're there. So tell us a little bit about A Killing on the Hill. There are quite a few of us that have read it already, but for those of us who, for those of our members who haven't, tell us a little bit about it and where some of that inspiration came from.
Sure. I mean, A Killing on the Hill and The Extraordinary Life of Sam Hell and The World Played Chess are also all written in the first person. And so there's just a an intimacy
Mm,
in that goes along with first person books that is really hard to achieve in third person books. You can do it, and it certainly has been done, but when you're writing in first person, it's just you can just delve so much deeper into the character and the characters and how they view the world, and all those things that make a character come to life. So, I when I wrote The Extraordinary Life of Sam Hell for Danielle Marshall at Lake Union Publishing, um, she said to me when it published, she said, "Okay, I'll see you in 3 years." I said, "3 years?" And she said, "That's when your next literary novel will be ready." And I said, "Okay." So, there was this moment where I started to panic because what was I going to write about? And suddenly I was hit with the notion of my senior year in high school when I went to work on a construction crew with three men. And that ended up being The World Played Chess. Fast forward 3 years later, I'm thinking of I'd like to write another sort of standalone book or a first person book. And I was up in the attic. I was cleaning out the attic, and I found these, very large books that there's scrapbooks or photographs.
right.
And I opened up and it was scrapbooks, and it was all these newspaper articles from the 1930s, 1933, 34, 35. Brought them downstairs and said to my wife, "What are these?" And she said, "Those are my grandfather's scrapbooks." We had lived in her grandmother's house when I first moved to Seattle and started writing. And so when we left that house, we took a lot of the personal effects, so they'd
Right.
be preserved, and that was one of the things we had. And so I was flipping through these scrapbooks. Never in a million years I think I was going to come across a story. And then all of a sudden I came to this article, and it said lawyers clash in Pom Pom nightclub murder trial. And I went, "You have got to be kidding me." And I read the opening paragraph, and it was, the lawyers in the Pom Pom nightclub killing, which took place on Profanity Hill. And I said, Profanity Hill? I mean, if
Yeah,
you don't can't find a story in that, you're not much of an author. So,
right.
the inspiration was my wife's grandfather. He was a lawyer in Seattle in the 1930s, and he had a lot of prominent clients. He was, basically a business lawyer, but he, also did criminal defense. And so, there was just a number of articles in there, but this one stood out. And I knew this had to be a book. Now, I originally thought I'd write it from sort of his perspective, the
Right.
defense lawyer. And then all of a sudden, as I started to sit down to write, I had this voice in my head, and he was saying, "No, that's not right. I need to tell the story." And I'm like, who is this? I'm a reporter. I'm a 19-year-old reporter. It's the Great Depression. I need this job. I need to tell this story. I need to be the reporter on this story. And I've learned after 25 novels to trust those instincts, and I
Right.
trusted him. And I let William Schumacher tell me the story of what became the trial of the century in Seattle.
Yeah. And I love it because he's so like innocent and naive at the beginning of the book, and then all of a sudden it takes him a minute and he's like, "Oh, wait a minute. Everybody's in on this." And
Yeah.
that really like and when I first saw it, I'm like the Pom Pom Club. Okay, I'm right back in that prohibition era, and I love how they're it's subtle that this is definitely the mob, and then all of a sudden it totally is, and you're feeling like I felt like I was there, and the characters are so real, and there are some parts and I was like, no, he didn't just do that to that character. And then there's some great twists at the end. And I would imagine that doing research on it, like you're feeling like, where do you cross the line with here's 2024 and you're living in this time period for this long, like what does the research look like and how do you like come up for air from that, like, and look at the rest of the world, because it kind of was a romanticized time in all
Yeah.
reality,
Very,
with gangsters and all of those sorts of things.
very much so. And there was a little bit of that whole nostalgia, but that's sort of the flavor that makes the book a noir type of novel.
Yeah,
And I think the people that understood that are the ones that really appreciated the book and really appreciated the time period, because it was a time when there was a tremendous amount of corruption, but it was because of the times. It was the Great
right.
Depression. It was prohibition. It was bootlegging. Everybody was just trying to make a nickel, from the shoeshine boys, to the mayor. They were just trying
Yeah,
to keep their heads above water. And so you could sort of give them forgiveness, be a little
yeah,
bit charitable, that it's like, okay. So William Schumacher, he is naive, but he's not stupid, and
yep,
he's intuitive. And
yeah,
that is what I really wanted the reader to come away with, is that being naive does not mean being dumb. Being
exactly.
naive
Yeah,
is not something to it's not a negative. I think a lot of us think of people that are naive as, oh God, when in reality being naive is sort of a beautiful thing, isn't it? I mean, you
totally
you
is.
you live in
Mhm.
your world, and you expect people to behave the way people are supposed to behave, and then suddenly
Yeah,
they're not, and you begin to realize,
yep,
wow. But I would put myself in the category of someone that is a little bit naive, uh, and that's okay. I'm happy with that, because I like the world that I live in.
yeah. I agree with that. I'm a teacher. I teach third grade. The kids are 8 and 9. And I love that age because everything's wonderful in the world. And it's so heartbreaking when they realize that it isn't.
Yeah.
Because that's about the age that they start realizing where they fit into the world and what's happening around them. And they have these big ideas of things like war and, even slavery, because I teach American Revolution, and
Hmm.
they're realizing, wait a minute, those things aren't just history, those things happen. And
Right.
I want them to stay naive too, because that's, I don't want them to grow up, so it's nice to see characters in books that, they're adults. Um, but and again, they're not,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
part of it. Yeah. So once you found the newspapers and started delving in, how long did it take you to research the rest of it, or did it all sort of just like flow together?
Well, interestingly enough, there's not a lot of books out there on Seattle in the 1930s. And so I had to rely upon a librarian at the Seattle Public Library. Evelyn was her name, who was just great about getting me maps, uh, l- maps that not only had the street names, but had the businesses on all the corners, and the Parrot Theater, and the Bon Marché, and all these different, the pastry shop. Um, and so I could put myself there, and I could go
Yeah.
back, and I could think to myself, I mean, William Schumacher is me, and I say that, but then I say, but he's not me. Okay, but
Right.
he is the person I would have been had I lived back then and I was a reporter, which I was for a while. So, to some extent, every character is a product of the author that creates them. So,
Right.
for me, it was just this fascinating time to go back to. And it is sort of romanticized. And it's,
Yeah.
uh, there's no, there's a reason why he meets Amara, right?
Yeah.
And you mentioned a little bit earlier about White Christmas, and And
Yep.
I love It's a Wonderful Life. I mean, that's the movie that stands
Yes.
out for me. And so, it was just natural that he would have this romanticized version of this beautiful young woman that he wants to someday date. He wants to go out with her. And he's trying desperately, to find a way, and he thinks he has it, and then the father gets in the way. And
Yeah.
it was just, for me, it was just a tremendous amount of fun. And uh, the thing that was what I have to do is I have to temper my expectations, because The Extraordinary Life of Sam Howell, The World Played Chess, they did not come out of the box and just skyrocket. That is what series books do, because people are
Right.
waiting for the next book and they buy it, and it just takes off. Books like this are sort of a slow boil, and
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden they begin to catch fire, and people begin to pick them up and say, wow, okay, this is a good read. I'm not sitting, I'm not people aren't getting shot and killed and blood and guts and gore and all this stuff. It's
Right.
just it's a book about a time that a lot of us lived in, and it's an ability to go back to that time.
Yeah. It's a little refreshing too, and I don't not necessarily mean refreshing, but when you think about Great Depression, you think of like Grapes of Wrath and, Four Winds. And, my grandmother lived in that time, and her family moved from Oklahoma to California, and I don't even know how they got there. And she lived in a chicken coop, and you hear a lot of those kinds of things. You don't always read the stories where, you're right, where everybody's trying to make a nickel.
Yeah,
And I felt so bad for Shu because he's like, okay, do I even have enough to buy a pastry to go see her? And but that was the reality of it. And then all this corruption and the money, and you're wondering throughout the book, like, is everyone corrupt but Shu? Is Fish corrupt? Then you find out, okay, well, everyone in the courtroom is trying to get a payoff, but it's because of the time period, and they didn't have the means and the money. And so it's nice to see that side too, in a way, because we typically see that, that nothing is growing, there's no food, and there's still love out of it, and he
yeah,
gets the girl in the end, just like those, movies, and, White Christmas, because he
yeah.
gets the girl in the end too, which is really great. Um, so which time period do you enjoy writing about the most? Because you've gone from, um, writing about Vietnam era, and, you have got court, in detective books, and then you're writing about, 1930s. Do you have one that you are drawn to the most, or do you try to not think about time in that way
I, I,
because you're
I
getting
don't I
across?
don't think about time in that way. I think what readers are drawn to is the same thing that I'm drawn to, which is characters who are alive, characters who are real. And the time period becomes a character in the book, especially in a book
Yeah,
like The World Played Chess, The Extraordinary Life of Sam Howell, A
yeah,
Killing on the Hill. And that's what you have to, I think, as a writer, understand is those are characters. Those time periods are
right.
characters because they mold and they shape the people around them, just like characters in a book mold and shape the other characters in the book. So for me, writing is all about understanding the characters and their motivations and why they do what they do. Uh, that to me is really the exciting part of writing, is when you have that moment where
Yeah,
it suddenly dawns on you why William Schumacher is doing what he's doing, why Sam Hill is doing a certain thing,
yeah,
helping Ernie without Ernie knowing it, so Ernie doesn't feel like he's a dummy.
yeah,
um, you know uh, Probably one of the hardest things I've ever done was in The World Played Chess. um, and all of a sudden I'm drawing a blank on the character, Williams, Sergeant. He's a Hispanic character, and you read that book and you get to a point and you suddenly realize that you know everything he's been saying is just not true, but he's got a reason for it.
he
you know
does. Yeah,
and so uh that to me is the exciting part of the art of writing novels, is letting those characters come to life on the page.
At what point in A Killing on the Hill did you go, this is my favorite? Like, this is just going to be, like, this is it. Do you ever have that moment writing a book where you're just like, oh, I got
Absolutely.
it?
Absolutely. I think it's when I created Howard Fishbaum, because
Yeah,
suddenly I had William Schumacher, I had Amara Giovacchini, I had Howard Fishbaum, I had Ernie Blunt. I had this world of characters, and that the story came alive for me. It was real.
yeah,
I wasn't writing a novel. I was writing a true story. And in a lot of respects, the trial is a true story, um,
right.
which I've, fictionalized through the characters. But um, I don't do this very often, but I did say to myself that I thought this book would be big. I thought this book would really be big.
Yeah,
Um, and I still believe it's going to be big.
yeah,
I think it's cinematic. I think it would be relatively easy for a producer to create, because so many of
yes,
the scenes take place in the courtroom or in the newspaper offices, or
right.
it's not, you don't have to worry about billions of dollars in special effects. Uh,
Yeah,
so I really, really, people ask me all the time whether I'm going to write a sequel. Right? You're going to write a sequel, right? You're going to write another one, but a sequel really depends
yeah,
a lot on what's how readers take to the book.
right,
Because while it's an art for me, it's a business for the people that put the books out there. So
right.
I would love to have William Schumacher come back. I already have
Me too.
ideas for what he would do and how he would get there. And so one of the reasons why I would really love to see the book take off even more than it already has, is so that I can let William come back to life.
Yeah.
You
Oh, I
know,
would love to see what happens with Fish, and, I don't wanna spoil the ending, but I kept thinking, "Oh, he's such a great guy," and my girlfriend was like, "No, he may not be." And then at one point as we were reading, she's like, "Everyone is a suspect here. You can't be thinking this positive about him." And I was like, "But I can tell he's a good guy." And then he turns out to be a good guy. Like, I would love to see where that all plays out as well, and what the next case is, um a- and how Shu grows as he's married, and those kinds of things, and how it affects his family, especially
sure,
in that time period with the Great Depression. So I'd be for that, and I would love to see this be a movie.
yeah,
I would love it. But, I think about this a lot with characters and character building, because I get really sad when books are over, because my favorite friends, my besties in these books are over. Um, which book have you written that you were just sad to finish?
oh, I think it always goes back to Sam Hell,
Yeah.
because
Oh,
I've had so many people who that book meant so much to them. The emails I have received from some people is absolutely heartbreaking. Um, and so, I've had so many people say to me, "Can't he come back? Can't
I know.
can't can't you bring him back?" And
Yeah.
I always think about To Kill a Mockingbird,
Yeah.
and then comes a Watchman, and I
Right.
just think that some books are meant to just live in people's imaginations.
Right.
Let people imagine what happens to Sam next, and how his life goes forward, and his son that he adopts, and and just
Yeah.
I don't think I could ever write it as well as people can imagine it. And that's something
Right.
that every writer, I think, well, at least it's something that I came to. It's something that Stephen King talked about. It's something that Diana Gabaldon talked about. And what it comes down to is leaving enough white space on the pages to allow the
Yeah.
reader to imagine.
Yeah.
Because when you can get readers to imagine, then they are truly in your story. Because a writer, no matter how good, could never be as good as a person's imagination. And
Exactly.
so
Yeah.
that really, to me, is when a book stands out, is when when I don't overwrite it, and when I allow white space for the reader to enjoy.
Yeah. So Sam Hell is what started my journey into your writing world. And honestly, like I laughed with Sam Hill. I cried with I loved his mother, loved her. I love when she gets on the phone and she's like, sticking up for him, and then all of a sudden she's moving the chairs and she's on the news. I'm like, oh, I know moms like that. I grew up with some moms like that. You know, the themes of discrimination and faith and family, like those are so strong and are relatable, right? And you're building this character that I think we all can relate to. you know I read that it took you 5 weeks to write and then 10 to publish, and
10 years.
10 years to publish. And I can't imagine how, like, was that by choice? Was it frustrating? Like, were you like, come on, let's get this published? And Nicola said to me, I've read that this is his opus book. And do you still feel that way about it? Because
You
you've
know,
written some fantastic books.
I think that, in all honesty, I'm really, really happy that the book didn't get published when I initially wrote it, because it's so much better now. What happened basically was I had an agent that didn't really like it, and
Yeah.
she told me she didn't really like it. And I had another agent, same my agent, same house, young lady at the time, and she said, Bob, it's a beautiful series of vignettes, but there's no through line. There's nothing holding every scene together. And she was right. And that's the reason why it sat so long, because I didn't understand what Sam's through line was,
Hmm.
how all the scenes linked together. And that came to me literally, sort of like the scrapbooks in A Killing on the Hill. I literally was walking out the door on a Saturday afternoon to go to 5 o'clock mass, uh, and I drove down the street, and I saw the steeple of the church, and I just got hit with a bolt of lightning. And the bolt of lightning was, Sam wants to believe, right? He wants to believe
Yeah.
his mother when she says, God gave you extraordinary eyes because you're going to have extraordinary life. But
Right.
but he can't, because he's bullied. He's bullied in school. He's bullied by the nuns that teach him. He's bullied by the principal. He's
Yeah.
ignored. He's made fun of. All those things that so many kids go through, and it's just so sad.
Yeah.
Um, and once I realized what that was, that what the through line was, I was able to make a U-turn, drive home, and I wrote, My mother called it God's will. I often wondered how my mother knew God's will. When I would ask
Yeah.
her that very question, she'd say to me, Have faith, Samuel. And off I
Mm.
went. And I cut, and I edited, and I added, and I moved, and I replaced, and I made everything sort of follow that one through line, which is Sam wants to believe, and the obstacles that get in the path of all of our beliefs, all of the things we want. That's what life is about. Life is about
Mhm.
overcoming our obstacles in order to achieve our
Right.
goals. And that's what the book turned out to be. And
Yeah.
it's so much better than it was when I wrote it that first time.
I when I read that 5 weeks, I was like, "Wow." Typically, how long does it take for you, to complete a book? Does
Every
it
every
vary?
every book every book is different. I will say this, I'm fast. I'm very fast. And I also have an incredible team in place. I have an incredible production process in place that
Right.
has worked now for 30 books. I've had, 30 bestsellers. And I really have a team that I trust and that I respect. It's read by one of my agents, and she comes back and gives me feedback. And then we hold back the other agent, and then I rework it and I make changes.
Right.
And then the second agent reads it, and she'll have some things for me, and I'll work on that. And then it goes to my editor, Gracie Doyle, who's really, really bright. And Gracie will come back, and Gracie will break it down into, this, and I'll go to work on that. And eventually it goes to my developmental editor, who is back east, named Charlotte Hersher. and Charlotte will write me a, in fact, the latest book, she'll write me a 5-page, single
Yeah.
space. And the
Yeah.
first, 2 paragraphs will be how great I am, how great the book is, how wonderful everything is. And then the next 4 pages are, have you thought of this? Could we do this? And,
right.
I'm human. Like every
Yeah.
writer out there, my initial reaction was, son of a bitch,
Yeah.
But I take a step back and I come back and I realize they're all right. They're all
Yeah.
right. And they don't make me, but they are a big part of my writing process that
Right.
creates the books that people enjoy.
So I've read that you don't like outline or storyboard or anything like that. It just sort of flows. To me, that's like a higher power, helping out too, because to not
Me
have
too.
to do those sorts of things as a writer is incredible. And I know that we have a lot of aspiring writers in our group, and they're always asking, like, how can I be a better writer and those sorts of things. And I think it's one of those things where you have to kind of find your own what works for you, and what works for one won't always work for another.
Yeah, and I've had a lot of opportunities to think about that and to refine it because I also teach. I
Right.
teach writing. I teach a course called the Novel Writing Intensive, which is with a writer named Stephen James, and we take 12 students only, and it's really an intense workshop. And here's the thing: I will never say to people, "I don't outline." What I will say to them is, "I have been teaching and studying the craft of writing for 25 years now. I intimately understand story structure. I
Right.
intimately understand how a story is told. So when I say to you, I don't outline, you have to understand that I'm coming from a place that might be different from where
Right.
a new writer is coming from. But you're absolutely 100% correct that you have to find the method that works best for you because I'm not an outliner. I've never been an outliner. I couldn't outline my answers to my essays on the law exam because I couldn't bring
Right.
myself to do it. So it was a real struggle for me in those initial years. And the turning point for me was failing. When I had my first series ultimately canceled by a publisher and I had time to go back and start to look at where did I go wrong. And I read Stephen King's On Writing, and he talked about the secret to great storytelling, and he said it's telepathy. And
Mhm.
your first reaction is, okay, what a bunch of hooey. And then
Right.
when you really kind of dig down to what he's talking about, and he says it, he says, how does a writer sitting at her desk touch the heart and soul of a person she's never met and never will, living in a town she's never visited and never will?
Right.
Telepathy. And then, again, some
Yeah.
years later, I was on a panel with Diana Gabaldon, the incredibly successful author of
Yeah.
the Outlander series. And she said much the same thing. She talked about the magic. The
Yeah.
magic of writing was letting the characters come alive on the page, not trying to direct them, not trying to tell them what to say, but just listening to them. And for me, those were aha moments when I was able to go, you know what? That's what I need to do. So when I'm writing, um, I very much take on each character in my novel. I am that person and I am saying the lines that they are saying. But I look at myself as somebody that is simply transcribing a story that's being told to me.
Right. Gosh, that has to be like, I would imagine like the best feeling, like everyone's like, "Oh, you should write a book about, this or that." And I'm like, "No, I'm the reader because I can see the world. I
Yeah.
don't have it telepathy for me." So let's go back for a minute to the World Played Chess, because that one really hit home for me because my dad was in Vietnam. And I spent most of my adult life reading everything possible about Vietnam, to try to understand him a little bit more. And I loved the parallel narratives in this book and the way that you connected three time periods, for this understanding of what William was going through with PTSD. And, that it kind of, I think my generation, it also resonates because some of my friends were in Afghanistan and in the Gulf War and do have PTSD. And like, where did that story come from? And that whole the narrative of trying to get the journal in. And I'll be honest, I just love Vinny. I love Mickey. I wanted to know them. I was rooting for them. I sobbed like a baby in that book, and it just blew my mind as a reader that you could take all of these characters and make them so incredibly real. Like, I just wanted to go hug them all. Um, yeah.
Every one of us, right? You, me, all your listeners, all the people that are out there that will see this interview, we all have these epiphanies in our lives. We don't know they're epiphanies when they happen because
Sure.
they don't have any. There's no depth to them at that point, right? There's another word I'm looking for here, and I'm not coming to me, but it's just a moment in our life at that time, and it's only with as time passes that we're able to look back at that moment and go, "Oh my God, wow!" For
Yeah.
some of us, it's that day when our future spouse, knocks on a door and you open it and she says, "I'm here to interview for a job." Or you go to a dance and you look across the room and wow. Um, my mother is 92 and she's just moved into a retirement facility and she's living next door to her girlfriend since the fourth grade.
Aw.
So for me, one of those moments in my life, which I didn't understand at the time, was I graduated from high school and my brother-in-law got me a job working on a construction crew with two Vietnam veterans.
Mm.
And like you, for whatever reason, I was fascinated by Vietnam. And I
Right.
actually had a book called Nam, which was written by Mark Baker,
Yep.
1984, on my shelves. You
Yep.
know, I think it was because I could relate to those. In any event, those two guys, wouldn't talk about Vietnam, but they began to
Mm.
when we'd go out and have some beers, or we'd sit on the construction site after working all day and open a cooler and drink a couple of beers together. And suddenly the stories would start to come out and they start to tell me, when they were my age at that time, 19 years old,
Right.
what they were going through, what they'd been through, all this stuff. So, I realized that was a turning point in my life. That's when I went from being a boy to being a man, when I had to grow up. Because there's a saying in that book, do your job, right? Do your job. And
Mhm.
I was expected to do my job. So if I went out with my friends and got shit faced and showed up at work the next day too sick to work, there was no sympathy. Their
Nope.
attitude was go throw up and then get over here
Yep.
and hand me the damn lumber. And
Yep.
so, do your job. So it was a real turning point in my life. And that's what I try to write about. Now, we talk about the things we plan and the things that we can't plan and they just happen. And
Right.
for me, that happened in that book because, I was writing in some respects about my son playing football in his senior year in high school.
Ah.
And so I asked him to read a draft of the book. And so he'd feel comfortable that I wasn't, usurping his life. And
Right.
he's the one who came to me and said, "Dad, I don't know anything about Vietnam. Nobody ever talks about it. It's not taught in school. I
Right.
don't know what it is. Is there a way that you can recreate it for me? Recreate it for your readers who don't know what Vietnam is?" And that's where the journal came from.
Ah.
And that's when I put the book on hold and I went back and I did a boatload of research, both from biographies and individuals that would talk to me. And I just kept reading and reading and taking notes and taking notes and taking notes until the stories began to repeat themselves. And then I realized, okay, I felt that I had a pretty good handle
Right.
on what it was like to be a young man in the bush, and every night, every time you went out, humping it, it might be the last time you go out. You may never come back. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah,
I think I think more people need to be reading about those sorts of things, especially if they're trying to understand family members or, because like I said, I obsess over Vietnam, and The Women by Kristen Hanna did the same thing to me. My mom was actually in nursing school. I don't know if you've read that yet, because I know you're a fan of hers as
yeah,
well.
big fan.
Um, I mean, cry through that book too. And all I could think about in The World Played Chess was that could be my dad. It explains an awful lot about how he is. And I've read The Things They Carry and Fallen Angel and those books too. And I think, um, if we have friends who are in the military at all, that we need to be keeping some of these things alive, because Vietnam seems to be the forgotten. Those guys don't want to talk about it because it was horrific, like any war, and they had some bad things happen to them. But I read it and it was so real to me. So I want to thank you for that book, because I just it hit home a lot for me.
Yeah. Well,
So,
when that book came out, and this was not planned, it was very close to the day that we pulled out of Afghanistan.
oh,
And I got a call from the news media saying, uh, "Did you plan this? Because the parallels are
oh,
incredibly close." Um, and I think that's why it's important to not romanticize war. I mean, I think of those poor
right.
people in Ukraine, and think of
Yeah,
think of getting up one morning, and the entire town that you lived in, the house, the school, the city hall, the police
yeah,
department, the place you shop, the place you ate, is all gone. It's all
gone.
gone.
Yeah,
And all the people that you lived your life with are dead, or they're gone and they're not coming back. There's nothing
right.
romantic about it. It's a
No.
horrible,
Yep.
horrible thing. And we keep doing it over and over and over again. And
Yeah.
I swear every once in a while, you hear this, and you hear this idea that, whenever there's a war or a threat of nuclear, people see UFOs, right?
Ah,
They see UFOs, and I think to myself, my God, I hope
yeah.
so. I hope there is a higher force out there that will prevent us from
Right.
killing ourselves,
Yeah,
because we
because we
don't
just
seem to
haven't
be
learned.
able to do it. You
No,
know?
we haven't learned about it, and it's happening, in Gaza, and, I have kids ask me all the time, "Why is Russia doing this to Ukraine?" And they have questions, and even, at 8 years old, they're like, "But we're supposed to learn from these things. How come we're not learning from those things?" And,
Yeah,
what it comes down to, I hate to tell them, but sometimes it's greed, and sometimes it's, land, and it's politics and all of these other things.
it's
So,
sad. It
eh,
just,
it
yeah.
really
I
is.
mean,
Yeah.
it's sad.
And it affects generations, like not just immediate, but long term, like family trauma. So, all right, I have some rapid fire questions because we could
Okay,
talk about Vietnam all day. All right, fastest book you've ever written out of all of yours.
Sam Hell.
Okay. Longest book, like the longest time period to write.
Oh, The Jurymaster, my first novel.
Okay. I have that one to read. I think I have probably half of yours to read. Favorite character out of all of them.
Sam Hell.
Okay. Least favorite character.
Oh, boy, that's hard, because even the books I've written that involve serial killers, those killers, they had things that you could feel sorry for them about the way they were raised, and how they turned out the way they did, and how things could
Right.
have been different. So that's a hard one. I'm not sure.
Yeah, because I think you
Maybe
probably
maybe
understand
David
too.
maybe David Bateman, but again, David Bateman was the product. He was a beaten child, and
Right,
the beaten child becomes the beater, and so you can empathize a
right.
little bit with that, and feel sorry for him.
Yeah, even serial killers, like I often wonder, like their childhoods, or there's some sort of trauma that makes them that way. So I would imagine that's really hard. Um, Preferred genre to write, because you write historical fiction, literary fiction, courtroom thrillers, detective, police. Which one is your favorite?
I love the literary novels. I love to write in first person. They're so personal, and they're so intimate that you feel like you're giving the reader a piece of yourself, of your own life.
Yeah. What genres do you read?
Everything.
Everything?
Everything and anything. I read fantasy, I read sci-fi, I read chick lit. My wife will have a book and she'll hand it to me, and it'll be, the Boston Girl, I think it was called. And
Mm,
as I will read anything with a good story,
yeah.
anything with a good story. And that's why I love Kristen Hanna's books. I love Lisa Gardner's books. I love Reese Bowen's books, because they are authors that know how to tell a great story.
Oh yeah, like Kristen Hanna's, and I've met her, and she's lovely, and her characters are just there. You just want to meet them too, and cheer them on and root for them.
Well, The
Um,
Nightingale is to me
ugh,
sort of what Sam Hell is for you. It's that
yeah,
book that hit me so deeply. Um, I liked it more than All the Light We Do Not See. I thought it was a more uh, a more intimate book. I thought that book, should win a Pulitzer Prize. I thought it was just brilliant.
yeah. It'll be interesting to see if she can pull that to the big screen and have the viewer feel the same for those characters,
Yeah,
because that's always the challenge in making movies, from
yeah,
books. But that one, I struggled a little bit at the beginning because I read 5 books at a time sometimes, and then all of a sudden there was a click part, and I'm like, okay, I can't get enough of this book, and I didn't want it to end either. What a wonderful book. Do you have a book that you recommend consistently to those who ask you?
The Green Mile.
Mm,
Um,
I
you know, I read The Green Mile before I start every new writing project. I read portions of it because it is so
right,
brilliantly crafted. Stephen King is so brilliant. And what he does is he helps me to remember to use all my senses, to write from the character's perspective, to not be afraid to write raw and honest and unfiltered, and to try to even get close to his prose. I think we all need to
right.
have a benchmark that we shoot for, and for me, it's him. I just think he will someday be mentioned in the same things as Charles Dickens and Pat Conroy, and
Right.
the great legends. He is, I think, that good.
Yeah. I remember seeing your TikTok with because I stitched it actually with your tattered copy of The Green Mile, because that's how separate Peace is for me. And I haven't read it in years, and I'm like, that was a great reminder for me that I need to go back and read it again. And mine's like falling apart, and
Yeah.
that was pretty fun. What did you read as a kid?
Um, everything and anything, but really what happened was, I was getting in trouble in school a lot, and I had a lovely nun in the sixth grade who thought I was bored, and so she called my
Mm,
mom in, and my mom had been a literature teacher before she started having 10 kids. And so she had all these books that she used to teach. And so she began handing them to me. So by the time I was 12 years old, I had read The Great Gatsby, The
yeah.
Old Man and the Sea, Of Mice and Men, To Kill a Mockingbird, The Count of Monte Cristo, The Old Man and the Sea. I mean, you name it. I had read all the classics because that's what my mom kept handing me. And
Right.
I just fell in love. I fell in love with stories. Like you. It sounds like you. They just they took me away from real life and allowed me to just be with these characters for a while.
Yeah. Which one was your favorite classic?
Um, I would probably say it's probably The Great Gatsby. Although
Yeah.
The Count of Monte Cristo is really up there as well. Um, because I mean, who doesn't love treasure, and who wouldn't like to
Right.
come back as somebody different and get
Yeah.
retribution. And those are probably the two that come to mind.
Yeah, I have a lot of those, and they're very tattered and written in because I always write in my books. Do you write in any of the books that you read or annotate them?
I don't. I
No.
don't. I mean, I probably did at one point, but not anymore. The thing that's
Right.
hard for me now is I get at, and not that I'm complaining, I get asked if I'll blurb books. And so,
Right.
you asked if I read The Women. Well, I got into it, and and then all of a sudden, I have three different. Can you read this book? Can you read?
Mhm.
So my wife read it, and my wife was like, "You got to read this book." I said, I know." We went to Italy, and I had a
Yeah.
chance to read Reese Bowen's book that's coming out, The Rose Arbor, I think it's called. And she's just such a wonderful storyteller. So in any event, yeah, I gotta find. I got between writing and golf and
Yeah.
some other things. I gotta find
And
time to
traveling.
read what I want to
And
read.
and traveling. So there's a question in the chat from one of our other admin, Brandy, and she's curious, what is your favorite fantasy book?
Lord of the Rings.
Ah, me too. And The Hobbit.
Yeah.
And I heard that they just re-released them into the theater. The
Ah,
extended cuts, so you could go to see them all. And one of my pen pals said how exhausting that was. But beautiful book as well. Um, so Um, so tell us about what's next for you, because I know you have a book coming out, I think in October, correct?
yeah.
Or somewhere around
It's the
there.
next Kira Dugan book. It's called Beyond Reasonable Doubt.
Okay.
That will be out in October, and then in December, a book called Hold Strong, which is a 1947 World War II book about
Oh,
American prisoners of war in the Philippines and Japanese, or were called Japanese hell ships. And these were ships that prisoners of war were put in. And it's. I was asked if I would help two guys write it. They're both college professors, I believe, and they had done a remarkable. And when I say that, I don't mean that lightly. A remarkable amount of research, but they needed some help putting the book together. It's not anything I've ever
right,
done before, um, but I felt that this book should be published because the
right.
amount of research that they had done, and it's a phenomenal story of a guy and his girlfriend uh, coming from a small town in Minnesota, and he goes off to war, and she goes off to try to help the war effort and becomes one of the code breakers.
Oh,
It's an
wow.
incredible story, and so that'll be out in, I believe, December or January of 2025. I'm editing what is probably close to a final draft of the next Tracy book, Tracy 11, which is going to be called A Dead Draw. I'm really excited about it. And then when I get done with that, I got to get going on the next Kira Dugan book because she's just really seems to have captured a lot of people's attention and heart.
Yeah.
So
Well, I can't wait to read those. I'm a huge World War II fan too, historical fiction.
it's an
So
incredible, it's an incredible story. It really is. From the Bataan Death March to the Japanese hell ships to traveling
yeah.
thousands of miles on foot through Japanese controlled China to
Oh
try to
gosh.
get safe. It's a remarkable story of the human desire and the human power to live.
Is it fiction or nonfiction?
It's I think what we're saying it's inspired by true events
Right.
because the events are true, uh,
Right.
and are again documented, but the characters living through those events are fictionalized.
Right.
Although some of them really did exist. Um,
Yeah.
and it's a hard period of time because um, you don't. It's not never my intent to make the Vietnamese people look bad, because we were at war with
Right.
them, and it's certainly not my intent to make the Japanese people look evil or anything. And that goes back to what we talked about earlier, which is war is what is evil, and
Correct.
what it does to men and women is what is evil. It's not the people that are evil.
Right, and bringing that story alive is so important because we don't want those people forgotten either.
Yeah.
The ones on both sides that,
Yeah.
we're trying to survive it too. All right, here's another question from the chat. What is your wife's favorite book that you've written?
Boy, I don't think I've ever asked that, but I know the answer. The
Okay,
answer is A Killing on the Hill because it brought her grandfather back to life.
right. That makes total sense. That's
That's
fantastic.
sort of the beauty of writing is, I had somebody say this to me just yesterday, a high school classmate, who reads all my stuff, and he said, when you die, you're leaving a legacy. You're
Yeah,
leaving something that will last conceivably forever. And
right.
it's like, wow, that's really, it's incredible. Yeah,
It's got to blow your mind a little bit, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Wow, it's an impressive legacy. I am so thankful to be able to talk to you and to hear your thoughts on writing and your characters because I have fallen in love with them. And as you can see from my obsession,
I
that
did.
I'm like, I started reading My Sister's Grave on vacation this week, but then the beach was calling me. So that's where I'm headed back to
Yeah.
start that series, and I'm a huge Nelson DeMille fan. So I can't wait to get into some of your longer series books because, he does this thing with characters that you just want to know them. So
Interestingly, people sent me some clips. There's a docu-series out right now called The Good Wife. It's about
mhm,
a woman who staged her own kidnapping,
right.
and one of the books she used to pull it off was My Sister's Grave.
Oh, really?
And the husband begins to figure it out because he pulls the books off her shelf, and he pulls the book off the shelf in the clip, and it's My Sister's Grave. And
Yeah.
that's when he starts to see the parallels.
Oh, cool. Did they have to get your permission for all of that?
No, because it's
No.
it's it's a true it's basically true events. It's a true story.
True events.
Yeah.
Oh, that's kind of wow. All right, before I let you go, there is another question in the chat. um, what is your least favorite or hardest part in your writing process?
I think it would probably be that final edit. You just when you're so sick of the book, you just want to get it out into the world. You just
Right.
feel like there's nothing more you can do to it. And yet you have to go through that final edit, and that's
Right.
hard. That is hard.
Do you ever have that little panic, like no one's gonna read it? Because I can't
I
imagine at
did.
this
I did. I
point.
did. I certainly did. Now it's not so much a panic. No one's going to read it. It's more of a hope that people will find it, like
Right.
a killing on the hill. That's my sincere hope, is that people find it, because I do think it's a terrific story, and I can say that because it's real. It's something that actually took place, and I think it's
Yes.
something that when people find it, they're going to enjoy it. But there are a lot of wonderful books out there, and they keep coming.
Yeah.
And so it's a matter of people finding you through all the noise.
Yeah. There's just not enough time to read them all.
Yeah,
So I'm going to echo this from Nicole Rubin. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. Our group will appreciate. I know appreciates it, and those people that are watching after the live. If you have any questions or for Robert, I can pass them along.
sure.
Um, his email address now. So, and I can't wait to read the next one because Megan has said it's wonderful.
Yeah,
And she's been feeding me books, so I'm grateful for her. So thank you
I am
again
as
so
well.
much, and I cannot wait to read the next one.
Thanks so much. Thank you for having me. It's always very humbling. So thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you so much. Bye, everybody.